this conversation is two white people, like from my face, two white people with you really like whispering us through some of it.
So that's another issue I had with the man-bear conversation, because white women are the ones marrying and also raising the men they want me to be afraid of more than them. But they're pumping out the scary guys. So stop it.
I am Daniella. In my day job, I am scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership. And I have been studying cults for a really long time. I grew up in one of the world's most notorious religious cults, the Children of God. And then I went into the military. And then while I was watching a cult leader run America, I wrote my first book, Uncultured. Some more exciting stuff happened after that got me even closer to the realization that white supremacy was a cult. We'll get into that in further conversations. But when I realized that white supremacy was a cult, I realized that there are quite a few things about deconstruction that follow this, because this is what I do. And I always explain to people that there are 3 stages of leaving a cult. You have to wake up, and you have to have the crack in the brainwashing, and then physically and mentally leave your cult. My husband and I feel like we did this. We woke up to the cult of white supremacy. We moved our family from Seattle to Maryland, and we are reading the books, right, and doing the stuff. But the second stage of deconstruction is a whole decade that starts when you start it, of deprogramming, right? All those little things, all of that code that was written in your head. And so, as well-intentioned as we are, we still need to spend, right? Probably like a whole nother 5 years, or probably a whole nother decade, deconstructing from the myth of white supremacy that we as white people were raised under. So I encountered White Woman Whisperer because she's amazing. And literally when I saw the title, I was like, oh, I need that. And I followed, and we had a great conversation. And then you really blow up with the bear.
Yeah, that bear. So if people don't understand, I'll give you a little background, right? So my name is Rebecca. I go by White Woman Whisperer, mostly on TikTok, now moving over to Patreon. I grew up in an extremely diverse community, before diverse was like a hot word to say, with lots of, like, I guess I idealistically believed in a bit of a post-racial America. So in some ways I was in the same cult of white supremacy, but in the kind of, but we've changed so much. And obviously I couldn't exist if we were still experiencing racism, right? Wrong. I was wrong. I'm a Black Jewish woman with my natural hair, and I thought nothing weird is going to happen to me. And I was wrong. And ever since realizing that it's a system and it's not individual, it's not a meritocracy, this is a caste system. Caste was one of the books that changed everything for me once I realized this is a system and I can work with that, because my brain loves me a system that makes sense. I just started reading everything, especially culty type of dynamics and understanding, with MLMs, with Scientology, just everything that was kind of entertainment I found myself drawn to. And then Dr. Steve Hassan asked a couple of questions when I realized, oh, I'm also in the cult of like capitalism, the corporation nation thing. So getting more into that and connecting it with anti-racism work, and then finding Daniella doing her knitting, and also being open to seeing how she could be maybe in another cult. It's like, I think we got to talk about some stuff. And I had her book and I was already reading it. And it's like things just naturally made sense. and people really want it. So I love being able to understand something without involving heavy Black racialized trauma, right? We don't, there are many examples and places that we can find proof of racism. This isn't going to be that place, at least not to me. You know, I'm not in the business of convincing anybody that I'm worth listening to. It's like, now that you know, that's kind of what my name was about too. Like, you have to already be okay with being called white, a white woman, and that maybe I have some information for you that you might want to know, because we're saying it anyway as Black women when you leave the room sometimes.
And, you know, one of the things that really opened my, or not even opened my eyes, but just changed the way that I think and investigate stuff was when Ijoma Luo, in her book, So You Want to Talk About Race, says, when a Black person says something is about race, believe them. Right. And to me, like, this is such an easy switch, right? Especially being in this world of Me Too, right? Of advocating, talking about military sexual trauma, but also about cults. Like, this is my whole work, is looking at groups that don't think that they're cults and being like, okay, but look at all this cult stuff that you do, right? And just kind of hold up that mirror there, because it isn't you, and it is certainly not, you know, the job of Black people who've been traumatized to pull down white supremacy. It is the job of white people. And somebody asked me,
Right.
why was leaving Seattle part of leaving white supremacy? And for me, it was a couple of things. One, I studied stereotype theory in depth. And one of the things stereotype theory tells us is that until you are 20% of a population, you are not addressing the negative stereotypes that are about your demographic. And so anyone, any listener, pull up a map right now and look at which states are under 20% African American. I mean, it is nothing west of Texas. Seattle, I believe, is 6% and 4% for the state of Washington. And so for me, there was two things there, which is you can't deprogram all the negative stereotypes if you're not engaging with positive, not stereotypes, but positive interactions. And then the second was, I don't want to raise a white child in a white state knowing that I'm in the cult of white supremacy, because I just see all of the reinforcing behaviors.
Right. And racism and anti-Blackness doesn't just involve who you're around or being around people of a different ethnicity, because I'm sure someone who thinks that, they're like, oh, people of color are there. It's like, no. You have to be able to say Black. You have to be able to say Black people. And we have this beautiful space online where we can finally share as Black people safely with white people. And safely is actually a relative word, considering
I was going to say
the you know, and I change that every day. I'm gaslighting myself a little bit. I still am working through my own, you know, naivete around how bad the cult is, right? And that was kind of what got me here, because I was like, no, they want to do. There's a lot of well-meaning white women who don't know that they're causing as much harm as they're causing, and I was right. But there are a lot more that do know what they're doing or don't care that what they're doing is harmful, way more than I don't know. Like I say anticipated, but you know, hindsight is hindsight, and that doesn't really matter what I expected. But
it is the
there is
don't
physical
care.
stuff.
It is the don't care, right? So I see this in the cult
Yeah.
world when people know that 12 Tribes Yellow Deli is a restaurant run by a cult that traffics children. And they just shrug and say, well, the sandwiches are good. And it blows my mind. And there's this, like, maybe this is the neurodivergent thing. My readers, by the way, told me that I was probably neurodivergent. And there's this
Same.
meme that I love that just says, people tell me I always have to be right. And at the risk of belying their point, I don't always have to be right. I always have to be correct. And so if you give me better information than I already have, I will correct myself. And this is kind of where
Right.
I'm like coming to all of this stuff with. And I just really connected with your analogy of white supremacy is like a booger.
Right.
Can you tell us about that?
And yeah, so one of my first viral videos was about displaying white privilege, and I had to put displaying on there, is like having a booger, right? You don't get upset at the person who told you you have a booger. You just blow your nose, check yourself in the mirror, and thank that person, right? Yes, you are embarrassed. Yes, it stings a little, but that is not the fault of the person who got up the nerve to tell you while everybody else didn't. We understand that sting. And there is zero reason for someone to tell you about an aspect of racism without it being in your best interest. But y'all are yelling at everybody because you're embarrassed, but misplaced, reactive. And then some people like to say, well, I can't get rid of the privilege, and we can talk about that because I don't love the word privilege because I don't think it is one. But like, you do have it and you get boogers and no one's shaming you for having them. I'm just saying, when I can see it, I'm going to tell you. They're allowed to be in your face, but like, I'm just going to let you know that the thing you just did exposed them to me,
For sure,
But
for
yelling
sure.
at
And,
people is a choice.
I've heard white privilege called unearned advantage, and not just white privilege. That can kind of be for any version of privilege. And I will just real quick tell my story about actually just hearing the term white privilege. So I am from a very, 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 very not privileged background. I read a book all about it. I had a very difficult childhood growing up, sex trafficked, labor trafficked, right? And when I was 15, I was kicked out. I was dropped off in America with $0. And I struggled and I struggled and I struggled. And I became a captain in the Army. And I worked so hard. And then I was a deployed captain, and another dude whose opinions I already knew I disagreed with, because he would tell me how he worked for everything he had as a white, tall, blonde, beautiful man in the military at a time when women could not hold certain jobs, right? So I was like already coming into this with like, okay. And then he used me to try to prove that white privilege didn't exist in the form of, you, Captain Mestenek, of all people, should know that white privilege doesn't exist. And when like somebody gives you a term for what you've been looking for, like when I defined the sacred assumption in cults, and I kid you not, and I just very dramatically sat up in bed and yelled out like, hold sacred. I was like, oh my God, that's what it is. That's why I've always been treated better. That's why I've always been helped. And even like, it's still hard for me to put it into words, but just like given the benefit of the doubt, right? By all
That's what
races
I
of
call it.
people in authority in America, that I was
Mm-hmm.
a good girl that wanted to succeed. And so,
Right.
and I tell you, it wasn't even until 2 weeks ago when I was making this series that I was like, there was an interview. There was an interview to become an officer. So even in my brain where I worked really hard to get that, there's no telling that if you had gone to that interview, you would have gotten the same chance that I did.
Right. And that's not a fault of anybody's, it's a fact. And the fact that people become defensive about it is an act of anti-Black racism. It's a denial, right, of something, because you're seeing it as a flaw, because you've been taught under this myth that hard work means good work. And if you didn't work hard, then it wasn't worthy. And your energy is your currency, right? That's it. It's not how much you did what you did, but we're just saying that it's an unearned benefit of the doubt over and over and over again. And the thing is that there are consequences, and consequences shape behavior, right? So if there's no consequences and we're getting all of the undue consequences and you're getting none, and you're given the benefit of the doubt every time, that's going to impact how we're all interacting with each other. But if you're angry, then we're starting in a bad place. So in some ways, I'd rather people kind of be like, oh, if you're angry about it, go over there. But here we're just talking. It's not a judgment. It can't be.
And
That's where it started, you know?
As you're talking this, there are so many parallels in cults, and there is a time when people have left their cults, right? So I'm talking to liberal white women right now. You've left your cult, but you still have the need to defend the good people or the good intentions, right? And so I have been saying for years, like, there were good people in the sex cult too. Like, this is not a black and white thing. One of the reasons I think I can even do this work kind of publicly is because I have no need to defend the garbage from whence I came, right? But that takes a really long time. And even in this thing of like, well, it was well-intentioned, that is, I think, the biggest stereotype about cults and why they still persist is because people say, oh, well, it started off good. And the reality is not one single example can I think of that it started off good, right? The children of God did not start off about love, faith, and Jesus. It started off as an incestuous pedophile who liked to play power games with people. And the cult joiner has the hardest time and often never gets there of realizing like it was not well-intentioned, right? To paraphrase Ta-Nehisi Coates, America is not a great country that had slavery. America built itself into a great country because of slavery.
Right.
Everything is connected there. And we have to be willing to understand that when we look at a toxic group or a toxic system, it's going to hurt. We're going to lose our sense of pride in our accomplishments and baubles that we won in that system. We might also lose a lot of friends and partners that are still in that system. And all of this is cult deconstruction. Like, there's not one thing different yet.
Right. For me, I'm so grateful that I found the world of cult deconstruction. And I really once I was allowing myself to relieve myself of, was this a cult? Was this not a cult? It doesn't really matter. I understand this dynamic now. And it's more about how inculted was I, and how much of did I have a sense of self? And did I know that that was something that existed? No, I'm going to tell you right now, no, I did not. Because I believed in the just do these things because that's the way it is, because I was, the annoying one always asking questions. And I was just like, it just is. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Nothing makes sense. And I gave into that because I learned how to get A's. I got, toxic dynamics all abound. My dad was a Jehovah's Witness. I don't know if I even told you that growing up. So I understood getting out of a cult because he was out by the time he met my mom, but his mother was still in, and everything, we just worked through that, as much as we did. So there's just a lot of change in my history, and I love that idea, but it comes with grief. There is grief involved. But at least it's not as personal to me once I see the cult dynamic for me. Oh, it wasn't me. I believed, I believed going to business, eventually I'd get happy.
Yeah. And I think it's really helpful to see that, right? Because, so first of all, like you were saying, like, oh, is it a cult? Is it not a cult? Like, to me, that is the least important question. In fact, I actually hesitated to like put a listicle together because I know that the first thing that a cult-like group does when you define a list is take that definition and train its people on how not to answer.
Mm.
And this is where the the racist but comes in, right? Like, if you have to say you're not a cult, you're a cult. And there's this really great cartoon, and it's the racist but. And every time someone says, I'm not a racist, but up runs the racist but. It's phenomenal. Please go Google this today, listeners. But that question, right, is not like, is it a cult? Is it not a cult? Right? Like, we know what cults are. We know what the worst things are, right? And if we can figure out why we do things, where they come from, right? Like, why we do all of these automatic things and where that comes from, we can get it out, right? So I say, kind of embarrassingly, you know, I thought that like white supremacy missed me because I grew up in the global South. I grew up being safer around Black and brown people than I was around white people. And in my opinion, a different standard of beauty. And now I have written a whole second book called UnAMERICAN about how it took me 20 years to realize that like white supremacy starts radicalizing you the second you set foot here. And all of this to say, like, I have never held a single conscious, like, ill thought toward people of a different skin color. And I've tried very hard to not have that. That doesn't mean that I wasn't in the cult of American white supremacy for these last 20 years and have had all of these pawns, right, being worked on me.
Right. And the reason that we have such a high rate of cults and cult indoctrination in America is because the original cult is like the highest here and the most successful here. And it's just interwoven itself into everything. And I just, it starts to all, you know, it's like, I called whiteness like an anti-identity. So it encourages you to give up who you are to become something for the cause. You become an accountant, you become a this, you become your profession, career day and all that stuff. And in those things is white supremacist value systems, in all of the things you should want to be, not to be, you know, the quantity over quality, valuing things that have numbers attached. It goes so much deeper than what's their skin color. That means I like them. That means I don't like them. Right. And it's what we see valuable. What, even like you said, it's not a conscious thought. Like, you wouldn't say, I think blonde people are the prettiest people because they're blonde, but you would kind of lean towards that. And it doesn't have to be a conscious thought. I didn't like my hair the way it naturally grew out of my head. That thought is based in anti-Black racism. Am I a bad person to myself? I mean, I wasn't great, but not a you know, that's not my fault. That came from society, not from my parents, nothing.
For me, it was like the opposite of a conscious thought, of a not conscious thought. Like, I knew I didn't look best as a blonde, but still my version of me feeling beautiful was blonde, right? So I spent $20,000 of my life probably like trying to be blonde. And it wasn't until I heard Tressie McMillan Cottom, who's writing a book called Blonde about the politics of beauty. And she said, you know, blonde is not a hair color, it is a race designator. And she said, all I will say is this: if you asked anyone, Black or white, to put together a list of the 20 most popular pop stars, almost nobody would put Beyonce or Rihanna on that list. Right. And in one moment, I was just immediately cured of blondness. And recently on one of my threads, people said, you know, blonde, blue-eyed is the white people version of colorism. And when I tell you the uproar in my family, because my daughter was one of the first in however many generations to not have blue eyes. Like, it gave me the ick. I didn't even know why. And now I
Yeah.
swear, like every time I hear, especially Mormons talking about blonde blue eyes, I just hear people saying, like, not one drop. There's not one drop. The racism that was too racist for Hitler, right?
Right. Because
That's
they
what
said people should
America
be,
is based on. We were too racist for
yeah,
Hitler. Hitler actually believed that there should be a way to become white, right? Going
yep.
back to what you were saying, right? Achieving this idea of whiteness. And one of my first viral videos was when someone asked, why do white people join cults? So many cults. And it's like, we will caveat that cults have been mostly defined by like white Western academics, of course. But what we see very often, at least a lot, very, very heavily in America, followed by Australia, which are both countries of displaced white people, right? People who have given up community for whiteness.
Hmm.
And this is again like the parallel to me from the cult, right? 2 generations ago, we were Slovakian. We were not white Americans. And I lost all of that by the cult taking that away from me. But it's not like my family over in California are still Slovakians, right? Like they lost that identity also.
Right. In order to dehumanize other people, you have to dehumanize yourself. It's, you know, that's why I think the most tormented mentally and emotionally are going to be the white people and the people closest to the pinnacle of success and winning, who still end up just being a human who is like, now what? And that's why you see these billionaires do the weirdest things. That was my moment that cured me of valuing money as like an actual valuable thing on its own, was hearing the stories of these billionaires who pay to do things that just no human should want to do. And I made me realize, oh, that's not going to make you happy. Being a person who can stand on solid ground and say, yeah, no, I don't think I believe the thing everybody around me believes, and becoming better for it is going to be the answer to all this, mayhem. But I do think the dehumanization required makes the cult, you just slide right into a different system. But
And that is such good
Australia is,
parallels, like for cult and war there, right? Which is like both of these are a theme in my book, Uncultured, which is you have to dehumanize other people to stack rank them in this way, right? And as soon as I believe, like as a sociologist, that our human sort of disease is that we have to stack rank and then we kill the ones at the bottom, right? Like that is how it ends up every time. And like,
right.
even before I was educated about trans people and everything that was going on, definitely before a sibling of mine came out as trans, I still remember hearing the debate about sports and being like, nope, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all the girls competing, but when we stack rank people, we kill the ones at the bottom. And I just can't get on board with that.
And it's not necessary. There's this belief that like, yeah, we have to because we always did. And this romanticization of the past, like you were talking about, the cults, we always say we started with good intentions. It's always easy to say when you're speaking for people you have projected your beliefs onto. And you've invested so much of your time, money, energy, values to this thing. It's okay to say, today is the first day I start questioning it. And it's not your fault, and it's a bunch of us, and it's a we thing, not a you, them, us, because
Right.
that's the natural way people tend to still deal with this conflict. Even you see today, it's everything's polarizing. It's what side are you on? And it's like, you're doing it again. You're doing it again. You're supposed to humanize the people you don't agree with.
Yeah. And, someone in my comments
But
says the
centuries of
problem
this,
with,
and I think capitalism was like one of the first really bad cults that we like, or the cult value systems or like subgroups that we didn't allow to fail, to see, too big to fail. And then we kept it going. And it shouldn't have. This is late stage capitalism. When you're keeping it, we got to let go. It's clearly not doing a good job. But it's scary.
And before even capitalism, I think you have patriarchy. And this is one of the things that I find where I'm like, every single time I see coercive control, it is just kind of tacked right along patriarchy. And all of this stuff is to prop up patriarchy. Someone here on my side was saying that the problem with defining who's on the bottom and eliminating the bottom is that who's on the bottom changes. And this is where I think this ties in really, really well to the sacred assumption in cults. I'm talking with White Woman Whisperer. This is our new podcast that we are launching soon called Hey White Women, and we are deconstructing white supremacy. So people ask me all the time, they're like, well, fine. Then how come you would want to take white supremacy down if you're a white person? Right. And I think most people want to answer this with like, because I'm good, because I'm human, because I care. And all of those things are true for me. However, the reason I want to take white supremacy down is because, like any cult, it is a con, right? It is a con.
Right.
It is not true. So the sacred assumption of white supremacy, as you said, is that if we play the game, if I show up quiet, skinny, and a light shade of beige, I will be at the top, right? And that life will be better for me. And it's not true. We are all worse off under white supremacy. And when you can crack the sacred assumption, that's when you get started pulling someone out of a cult, right? But as long as you are buying in to the system of indoctrination and you believe that like this is better subconsciously, right? This is not like me doing this to like make Rebecca's life better because I'm a nice person. This can be me 100% selfishly being like, when we are all equal, life is better for everyone. I say this to my husband about patriarchy. I'm like, under feminism, everybody has more sex. Everybody is happier.
Yeah. There's my point is never like a gotcha. Some people are like, we don't deserve this. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, maybe not, but I'm not really necessarily doing it for you. I'm also doing it for me and my people. And then in turn, that'll even be better for you. But you have to see that it's in your best interest. And I'm not going to be the one to try to convince you to see it, I think that's a good point to have with a lot of people. I always say like this type of thing could be your moment to kind of crack someone else's brainwashing. And say, I was just listening to this thing and I realized this about myself, which might, that vulnerability leads to others doing something similar. And then maybe being a safer person to others. Community. It's very contagious. That's my opinion anyway.
Yes. And also,
it's everything.
We have a bit of a delay. And also just like, hey, white women, like once we see it, then it becomes like our job to take it down, right? Because the thing about systems is systems only come down in two ways, right? Which is the people at the top decide to change them. The best example of this I've heard is women couldn't vote themselves the right to vote, right? We had to convince the men, in this case, the enemy, to change that system. Right? So systems only change if the people at the top change them or the people at the bottom rise up and pull them down. Right? And one of the things I learned recently going viral in parallel with White Woman Whisperer, so as she was going viral for saying something very important that we all need to hear about the bear, which I'm going to leave for her to say, and she was getting attacked and destroyed for it, I was going viral for a video about how I learned that when I moved to Maryland, I learned that I walked racist. And that was, I had nothing, right? I had people being very, very kind to me about it. I had white women realizing, like you said, with the vulnerability, and the few people that were not nice, it was fine, right? And so one of the realizations that I had was, we all have, from the perspective of our different privileges, like things that we can do with our voices that don't cost us very much, right? And it cost you a lot to say the things
Yeah.
that you said. And meanwhile, since that
Yeah.
day, I have been getting on the internet every single day and talking about how America is bad to Black women, and it has not cost me anything.
That right there, that's a lot. That's saying a lot, and it's really important. And I often say a lot of the solutions to our issues are going to actually be very simple. Not easy always, but simple. You know, living a human life is not supposed to be complex to be good. But that's under the myth of white supremacy has kind of made that the case. But yeah, I appreciate you pointing that out, because that's everything. We tend to look for solutions as big as our problems, and it's not going to be that satisfying. It's not going to be your Katniss Everdeen moment in Hunger Games. It's just going to be like slowly planting seeds in people's lives and hoping for the best. But so there has been a lot of conversation online amongst women about if you were stuck alone in the woods with a man or a bear, a strange man or a strange bear, which one would you rather? And the point of the exercise, or at least the point of the conversation going viral, was that women would rather be alone with a bear than a random man, because of all the danger implications that can come with the motives of a man we don't know. And I said to myself, which I'm going to tell you, so I did not expect this to be a big deal, but I said, this is similar, white, and I addressed it to white women, which maybe doesn't matter. I'm not taking it back. I said, hey, white women, I know you're getting very excited about this conversation. I just want to remind you or let you know that it is the same. And I said same-ish, even though it is actually more realistic, but whatever, to say, hey, Black women, if you're alone in a conference room and someone's about to walk in and it's going to be a white person, would you rather be a white man or a white woman? Similar vibe to the question. And I said, remember how men felt when we chose the bear. I just want us all to know, because I want to, use this conversation so that you can understand. And it's not a wild statement at all, being proven by the immediate reaction of Black women to say white man. Immediate. I thought this was a connecting moment. Yes, some people might be surprised, I thought, but the immediate dismissal of my womanhood and the cause for whatever, it's gone well, but it's also gone terribly. But like I've said before, that every time white women complain about men in general, like men, I'm thinking, hey, you too. Like, that's exactly what Black women are saying about you. But whether you agree or not, it's the case. But apparently there's still policing going on of Black women's bodies and minds.
An interesting thing to what you were saying, I took a class. So when I was at Harvard, I took a class on power and privilege in systems. And that teacher, by the way, pulled aside almost all of the white women. There were no white men in this class, but there were a lot of white women in this class. And she pulled aside almost all of us and taught us about how something that white women specifically do is that every time Black women bring up something that they experience, we will relate it to men doing it to us. And so we'll take that conversation and turn it to patriarchy and like immediately recenter ourselves. And I like this flip around that you did. I know, like, I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life. Like, every time I'm in my head screaming at men or my husband, I'm going to be like, okay, what's the white supremacy version of this?
It's every time. And the responses and it was like, I didn't know how much until I was getting the responses and so many specific, you know, threats of what men will do to me as if I'm not a woman, which is heartbreaking for me sometimes because it's like that has never been my issue. Not that it should be, but just like as late diagnosed autistic, being a woman has always been really hard for me. So like now you're like, guess what? Men can be bad. Why do you think I'm the white woman whisperer? I know this. I'm still saying what I'm saying. So imagine how scary it must be to deal with you guys, and how not real those work friendships are. By the way, please leave your Black coworkers alone. That's a lot of why I even started my work, you know. And of course, it comes from somewhere because that's why white feminism is just the patriarchy with women in charge. That's not what a matriarchy is. You know, that's a completely different value system. It's been disheartening and it has not gotten better. That's why I'm pushing Patreon, because I'm actually going to be stepping away from TikTok probably because men have found me as well. I think I might be on some kind of Reddit or something that it's gotten really, really gross. And then from the safety of my home, I'm still getting this. And you're proving the point, right? They had to report me and get me demonetized and have terrible things to say about my character. I didn't even answer the question either in my hypothetical. I didn't even answer it. But they answered it for me in many, many ways, right? Like
They demonstrate
but
it,
we could do
right?
better
Like when the comment section demonstrates the point of the video. This is like every time I make a cult video about AA, I'm like, even if I had found nothing similar, just the reaction itself is like, ooh, you're on the right track. So by the way, please do both follow us on Patreon. We are just a hoot all the time. And part of why we are starting this podcast is because I think we're both moving away from TikTok, which has become a bit toxic.
Yeah.
Gosh, you said something that I was like, it was so important, but I think I've forgotten.
The white
We'll come
supremacy
back to it.
version of the bear man.
Yeah, well, you know, it's even this conversation, right? It's just like seeing the difference of the reaction to me and the reaction to you. It was like, wow, you know, so we need to have this conversation, and this conversation is two white people, you know, like from my face to white people, with you really like whispering us through some of it. And we hope that for future episodes of this podcast, we're going to have like a topic, right? We're going to jump in and discuss a topic for an hour of white supremacy. I assume we're just going to have topics rolling in by the time we launch a few episodes. So that's the hope.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's everywhere too, you know, like, and it's especially, I mean, yeah, white women, man, like with the MLMs and everything. And like I just want so much better for y'all so that we can all do better. And had you originally stuck with women back then, because people like to call me divisive and unity and we need it. If you had seen Black women as women, you know, before, like we would be in a completely different place. That you sided with the men. So that's another issue I had with the man bear conversation, because white women are the ones marrying and also raising the men they want me to be afraid of more than them. But they're pumping out the scary guys. So stop it, you know? That's just my goal. But I got to do it via the people who already want to do it, like you and other white women who are like, okay, I'm ready to do this. And it's not going to be as hard as it is for me. So, you know, I got to get out of the line of fire for a bit because it's no good for me.
Yeah,
anymore,
for sure.
anyway.
Well, I like to believe I'm ready for it. So we will see how this conversation unfolds. The thing that I thought about earlier that you were saying with like women, like leave your Black coworkers alone. And somebody explained this to me very well in 2020, which was you don't have that Black woman is not your friend unless you have been in her kitchen. And it's like, that's the hearth, that's home, that's safety. And they're not in a hurry to bring white women into the kitchen. And something else that came out of the bear conversation was, we intend well, but we sleep with the enemy, right? We sleep next to the enemy every day as we are saying patriarchy, 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 right? So this is I think it's very significant that we're knitting and crocheting for this show, because I find it to be like, once you realize you're in this cult, right? Or like once you realize that this tapestry you've been given is like full of holes and mistakes, you have to like tear it all out and go back and start again. And that's like hard to do.
It is hard to do, but I think that if you go into it knowing, so I love that you brought up crochet and that specifically, because my relationship with crochet, I think is starting to change my outlook on just experiencing things, right? Because I didn't learn to crochet till a couple of years ago. My mom was getting sick. She always crocheted. I learned it a little, but whatever. I wanted to do something with my hands that wasn't scrolling. And so it was just out of that desire. Like, it looked interesting. I saw you knitting. I saw a bunch of other people crocheting just like the same thing in the mornings as a relaxing thing. And I thought, I'm going to try that. I want it. That looks like a relaxing activity, fun. And it is developed into this thing where I have all of these pieces that I'm so emotionally attached to, and I love doing it. And people are like wanting to buy it. I'm not there yet. It's become this whole thing. But I have started over. I had to make a bunch of stuff I don't really like that much. But I enjoyed the process. I've frogged stuff where you like rip everything out. But I don't see that as a setback because I'm not selling them. Right? Because I'm making sure that this is still for my enjoyment of doing the action and not making a product. But I've had to be so intentional about not turning it into a business. Like, I would have been stuck on blankets.
You do.
And
I'll tell you, one of my therapists just told me I can't consider reading or knitting or crocheting as relaxation anymore now that I've made it all my business. But, I think there's this like beautiful analogy for what we were talking about in the beginning of like when you're raised in a cult, like you don't know your identity. Right. And as soon as you realize that, like, I don't know my identity, right? Like I realized this when I was writing Uncultured and even more Un-American. You can find information about that in the links. I realized that like, I just completely lose my train of thought. I realized that I have been like just fallen into like I have to try to pass as what I look the most like, which is a white blonde girl from Texas. And then just realizing like I don't even like that girl. Like, why am I trying so hard to be her? Right? So fast forward to crochet and knitting, and like I'm quite the designer now. If you're watching us on video, I'm wearing this thing I call the scarf again, where you take a scarf and I turn it into a cardigan. And there's a whole different feel when you are wearing something you made and somebody compliments you, right? It's like, thanks, I made this, right? It's like, to me, that's like, your identity, right? And you're so much more proud of it because you made it. Like, you did the work to do this. And now, like, you know who you are. And I am not embarrassed about wearing any of my ridiculous, like, outfits in public because, like, I made them. I chose this.
Right. It's so different. And yeah, even with this, the things I've been making recently, it's just like I found myself wanting to look at these colors. I just enjoy looking at the colors. I like watching it come together different ways every time I make the same sweater. And like my autism loves the repetition of the movement of the thing. It's just very easy. But I do like getting compliments on it when I go outside. I tried to hold it in. Someone said, "Oh, I love your shirt," and I said, "I made it." I could not hold it in. And that is it's like I said, it's so simple, but it's so fulfilling. And I get why your therapist would say that it, now it's not your relaxation hobby, because just why you do something is different. I have to monitor myself so much in terms of, why am I doing this? Is this for me? Or is this because, my dad would be impressed, even though he's never going to know, like I've had to stop a couple things that I just was doing because I thought it sounded cool.
Yep. Yep. So far I haven't sold scarfigans. So these are like my creative endeavor, but I do get this every time. Like I paint, and then when someone commissions a painting, I immediately don't want to do it. Or, even with some of these things that I make that are art that are fun for me, which is of course why people is commissioning it from you, because you're putting your art and your spirit and whatever into it. But then I just lose interest, and it's like, so, but this brings
Yeah,
us
because it's
back to
also like,
capitalism, right? And it's like,
right,
again, like,
right.
how do you leave the cult of capitalism, but you still got to make money? I don't have the
Right.
answer.
Well, that's why, that I had struggled to do that. And it was something I was working through with my therapist. And it's why a lot of civil rights leaders ended up, like indigent and like not, being able to afford stuff, because it's hard to live authentically under this system. And for me, that's why I'm so grateful that I not figured out, but like this Patreon as my avenue forward, because I can move with numbers and actual value. Like, it's a place where the numbers do reflect how much I'm able to support myself at some point. If my work is good and they still want to hear it, then they'll pay. And one person can't go, I'm going to pull this deal from you, or we're not going to. It would, but it took a lot of investment in terms of time and energy and savings to even get to that place. But I was,
For sure.
every time I had to put a number on something, it felt like generational trauma whipping me. Like, the idea of putting a dollar value on my hour, like, I know it's fine and I can put whatever, but it was just like, nope, I just short circuit. And so I've just bailed, and I've been hoarding all of my crochet pieces for eventually I'll do maybe like giveaways or raffles. And so you can get what it's worth if everyone gives like $5, you get a bunch of people, and then one person gets it and they only paid $5. I don't know. But the capitalism one is really hard because it's also gross. Like, I looked
Well,
up
and it comes to
capitalism just to get a definition, and it's not good.
and it comes back to this
They
whole
still
kind of central question that I know you and me are both trying to ask, which is like, well, when you wake up to the cult, that are these systems that you can't just leave, right? Like, I can be as woke to white supremacy as possible, still going to be a white woman in a white woman body, right? So, and I think what you're talking about Patreon leads us to like the Cassandra effect. And then maybe it's a good time to wrap up. But one of the things, so Cassandra is in Troy, right? The story of Troy. Cassandra is the one, of course, because a dude wanted something from her that she didn't want to give, who gets cursed that she is going to have the gift of prophecy, but nobody will believe her. And I think like there are so many of us who do this work that comes down to essentially criticizing the system, right? But then the system doesn't like you. And I tell you that in intelligence school in the army, like they warned us about this. They were like, when you're the one always predicting the bad guy and the downfall, right? Like people are not going to like you. And I see this, I'm sure you get this all the time. It's so funny to me. People will pop up on any of my platforms and just be like, ugh, is all you talk about cults? And I'm like, on this platform, which I built to talk about cults? Yes. Like, I'm not here to convince you I have a well-rounded, happy life. Like, I'm here to put this stuff out because this is my job. But now, so I call us professional Cassandras, and I think Rebecca is a professional Cassandra as well.
I love that.
And we see this stuff. So we
I
see
like
this
giving it a
stuff. We got
name.
to call it out, you know.
And I think honestly, and that's going to be most of it, is calling it out within yourself too. Just like I'm saying, it's not about stepping out of the system and like, now what? It's like, what parts of me are still in it? And as you realize that, you'll kind of see opportunities where you're not going to go, like saying things like, I can't leave money on the table, or you don't want to leave money on the table. I've been questioning as I get ready to film my individualism segment or like video on the tenets of white supremacy. I'm doing individualism, but like you can't, the idea of leaving money on the table, you'll notice it on TikTok a lot. They'll say, I feel bad for anybody who paid the normal price for this thing. Very, very individualistic. Like, what, God forbid you don't get every dollar you could have gotten. That's loss aversion. We got to, think to ourselves, do I not want to do this because I want to avoid a negative? Or would it be better if I just said something? Yeah. And that will do a lot of the work, is just questioning your own natural instincts and just giving like a little boop, 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 boop scan for white supremacist values. Or like, what would a man say? What would a man say? Because white women are the men of women, which is basically what I said about the bear thing, but I just said it nice, and I shouldn't have even said it nice.
We need that one on a t-shirt for sure, and some stickers. Like, white women are the men of women. Epic. But this is, and this is deconstruction. And what I've noticed with deconstruction, and there's many thinkers that talk about this in different ways, but it's like, once you can name it, right? So Un-American is the 150-page book I wrote to get to the conclusion of, like I said earlier, like, oh, white supremacy started radicalizing me the moment I set foot in America. And because of this, I felt like an other, and I always knew I related more to others. In my subconscious mind, I knew anything other than straight white man or woman was an other, but I couldn't like say that in a conscious phrase. And I think once you can say it, right, admit it to yourself in a conscious phrase, like, oh, I think I'm walking racist. Let me pay attention to that, right? You can fix that.
Yep.
And then there's one more aspect to this that I'm going to emphasize, and I'm probably putting this one on a t-shirt, and I'm going to say it a lot. But it's that when you are a cult baby, when you are someone who was born and raised in your cult, so every single white person, there are things about the cult that are part of your personality that you can't really change. So what do we do? Well, if we refuse to deconstruct, then sometimes we just go cult hopping and join a bunch of other lesser cults because we are, these are our personalities, right? And this can be like when white women go get involved in social justice and then just keep doing all the same stuff of centering themselves, blah, 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 right? But once we realize this is part of my personality, right? So my cult self, like, I need to have a mission. But I know that the mission can be toxic because I was also taught to self-sacrifice and give my labor and all of these things. So I can redefine my mission as, my mission is me, right? My mission is Tom and Daniella and little Love Young having a good life. And I think that as white women, there are things about our personalities that we can't change. But we don't have to change the personality. We just have to not use it for the cult, right? So we can be the Karens of anti-racism and like demand to speak to the manager of racism as much as we can, right? Because like once you have left the cult, there's a reason that my third rule of cults is they'll forgive any sin except the sin of leaving, because then you become the most dangerous person to the cult. So that is my call to action for all of us liberal white women. Karens of anti-racism.
That is amazing. No, absolutely. And that was what I learned. I love that, bringing us back to the cult thing too, because that was what I realized too. That the ex-members are the most powerful. That's why you're the most dangerous, because you're the Sarah Edmondson, Mike Render, these people who are, so you get like a peak blonde Southern woman, you get these people to say, I wasn't having a good time there, and I am having a good time now that I'm acknowledging my whiteness and talking to people who are talking to me truthfully, and that alone is going to draw people to an anti-racist conversation. Meanwhile, I'm over here
Yes.
just like, please do it.
And
Please try.
so, I got to witness this firsthand with my husband, who I say, like, I married the white, tall, Christian Republican man whose beard can be right in between veteran and MAGA. There's like a 1 inch difference there, And it took me 7 long years to radicalize him into being like a full hardcore feminist, right? But now he's a really fantastic billboard that I just hang feminist t-shirts on and send into the world. And it's so funny because he always has these like, oh, I can't wait. Like he has these dreams of the arguments that he's going to have with people over these incendiary terms. Has he ever had one?
Yeah.
No, because nobody is walking up to a 6'2" white blonde man and telling him he's wrong, right? So that's why his voice, now radicalized, is an agent for change, right? And when I call something out, right? Like see something racist happening to somebody and call something out, would you have asked her that question, officer, if she's a US citizen, if she wasn't brown? We're the more powerful voice, right? Because the cop is not going to kill me. So sorry to veer into like very, very serious there as we need to end. But like this really is at the end of the day, life and death for people who don't look that like us. And I am in the stage of being so angry at the cult for like doing this to all of us. So thank you for being here and thank you for helping us take down cults.
Thank you for participating and being willing to stick it through and just do the work.
So excited about this. See you next time.